Welcome to the ADHC Talks podcast, produced by the Alabama Digital Humanities Center at the University of Alabama Libraries. I'm your host, Sara Whitver. This video podcast documents digital humanities research through semi-structured conversations with DH scholars and practitioners. We record 4 episodes each semester, caption them, and publish them on YouTube. Our guest today is Dr. Vincent F. Scalfani. Vincent serves as the Director of Research Computing Services at the University of Alabama Libraries, providing leadership and support for the newly evolving research computing services across the disciplines. Additionally, he serves as subject liaison for chemical sciences and mathematics. Before joining the University of Alabama in 2012, he earned a Ph.D. in chemistry from Colorado State University. His research interests include chemical information and cheminformatics. Today, we're going to be talking about a project that has been ongoing, a project that I am just absolutely in love with. It's the University of Alabama Libraries Scholarly API Cookbook, which is an open access online book featuring concise code examples or recipes that illustrate how to interact with various scholarly web service APIs. These APIs enable researchers to automate search queries, customize data sets, and more easily integrate their information workflows into downstream data analysis processes. Launched in 2022, the Cookbook is continually enhanced and updated by student programmers at the libraries. Vin and I have been on faculty here at the University Libraries for about 13 years, and I'm honestly always excited when I have an opportunity to collaborate with him, and especially when I have a chance to hear about his projects, because they're always very enlightening, and I always learn a lot from you, Vin. So do you have anything that you would like to add before we start our conversation about the cookbook?
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction, Sarah. No, I think you covered it pretty well. Yeah, yeah, we can jump into questions.
Okay, so I have a standard question that I ask everyone, and it's the one that makes me the most excited. So I want you to tell me about your research, and I specifically want to know what makes you feel nerdy and excited.
Yeah, so I'll put it in the kind of in the context of the cookbook. I think one of the things that has um, interested us to kind of produce or continue to work on this cookbook is kind of this idea of, programmatically accessing information has always been interesting to me. I think, um, as librarians, we use, web interfaces quite a bit, and kind of that, I don't know, that extra element of being able to interact with those databases with computer code is always kind of, maybe nerdy and exciting, and then being able to kind of put that into context of, how do we integrate this into scholarly workflows is kind of exciting for me. So,
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw you talking about the cookbook. I think you were doing it at one of those summer liaison meetings that we have. And I think it wasn't the cookbook. I think you were just demonstrating accessing library resources with APIs, and I didn't know what an API was. And I was kind of gobsmacked. I was like, you could do that? Like, what kind of magic is that? And I've had to learn about what an API is. And I know that a lot of DH scholars don't know what that is. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what an API is and sort of how it functions to help us access this information programmatically? I know that you've worked a very small amount with the APIs with Omeka, and that would be one context that DH folks would use it, but there's plenty of others.
yeah, so API, so stands for Application Programming Interface. And in this context, with the Scholarly API Cookbook, what we're talking about are these web service APIs. And the way I describe it, when we're teaching about it is think of, when you go to a website, when you navigate to a website, the library homepage, for example, what is it, lib.ua.edu.
Mhm.
You put in a request and you get returned HTML, and then it gets sort of rendered nicely in your web browser. Well, it's kind of a similar process in what we do, but we put in a request, and then instead of getting, for example, a whole web page back, we'll get kind of a piece of machine readable data back. So we'll get the data returned, and then what's nice is that it's usually in some type of structured format like XML or JSON formatting, or even plain text, where you can then kind of parse it into however you want to format your data. So that's sort of the idea, is that kind of it's a similar idea to, making a request over the web, but instead of a web page getting returned, you're returning some type of data or information.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So my normal pivot right now is to ask about your history in DH. You're more of an informatics and a science researcher, but you do a lot of digital scholarship, and I've seen your interest in digital scholarship grow over the last decade or so that we've worked together. Can you tell me a little bit about how you like where was the beginning of your work in digital scholarship? What did that start in
Yeah.
grad school, or did it start after you became a librarian? Like sort
You
of,
know, I did a little bit. Yeah, it's a great question. I did a little bit of programming in graduate school, but I don't really think I fully understood what I was doing. So it was very, very kind of basic programming to automate some things. But I think, yeah, I really started to program more kind of around maybe 2015 or so, maybe a few years after joining the libraries here. And actually, the cookbook was a great motivator to learn how to program, because I found it really interesting, and I found that connection back to kind of the information piece that we're doing, is where we're using, code to do, information queries and do library searches, and it seemed to fit very well with our kind of overall goals of searching and discovering information. So that's probably what got me kind of more into coding, and then started to do more with thinking about how I could incorporate code into my research, into cheminformatics research, and this kind of excitement of being able to uh, kind of process molecular data with code and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, the cookbook, I will say, was kind of the initial start to really enjoying working with programming.
yeah. What would you recommend for somebody if they wanted to start getting into some programming? Like, would you say that a project-based sort of experience is a good gateway into learning about programming, or is there more of a like a systematic foundations approach that you like, you help a lot of people who have programming needs on campus, and you supervise a whole group of student programmers. Um, so like
Yeah. So,
where's a good
yeah, in
starting?
fact, I should say that we should back up maybe a little bit, if you don't mind, with the cookbook. It's really student driven now. Initially I had developed a few very initial recipes, or sort of tutorials back in 2021, 2022. But since then, our student employees have really worked on the tutorials and published tutorials themselves. So it's very much a student-driven project. But yeah, to answer your question about how to get into programming, I think you're right. I think project-based learning seems to be how that seems to be how I learn. I have to have like a research project or some sort of teaching project to be able to then really learn the tool or learn the technique. Certainly, learning some of the basics and some of our general workshops or from some introductory books, I think is helpful to give you some context about, you know, what is programming all about, but then to kind of really get into it, I think it's helpful to find a use case in your discipline, whether that's in the scholarly literature or on various, open information sources on the internet, but having some sort of project that you can relate to and then put it in the context of code, I think is a really powerful way to learn.
Yeah. I know I took a basic Python class and I was really excited, like, oh, I'm going to learn Python. And it was so hard because it was not focused on that kind of goal. Like, it wasn't tangible in the way that I I think I learned best. And I found that at the very end, I was able to pull everything together because I had to make a final project and I made a game, right? That
Nice.
that had several different little very simple like you know, scripts in it. But until that end point, I really didn't even put all of the like putting the pieces together was really hard because it was all abstract. So yeah, I I think what what kind of ways can people interact with the cookbook if they don't have any experience coding? Like, do you think that that would be a good place to start if you have a research goal, like you want to build a corpus for something that you would need to get from, the library's resources? There's several instances where maybe you want to do text mining or you want to
Mhm.
make a network graph of some things. Like, would you recommend that people start at the cookbook and like where would they start? And you're welcome to share your screen if you want to sort of
Yeah, so let me
oh
do that. That's a good idea. Let's see. We'll take a look at the cookbook. Share. Okay. Can you see my browser window here?
yes.
Right. So this is the homepage of the Scholarly API Cookbook. And cookbook, I don't know if we describe that term, but really just some type of online tutorial is what we mean by cookbook, sort of um, a short tutorial, one that's not meant to be, 50 pages long, but something that you can kind of work through within, you know, I don't know, depending upon your experience, maybe a few minutes to a few hours, something like that. Okay. So this is what the cookbook looks like. You can see on the left here we have kind of different categories for different relevant scholarly APIs, so getting full text data, bibliographic metadata, and then some sort of subject area ones like business, humanities, and scientific. And so each recipe or cookbook tutorial has, so let me click on one of these. I'll go to the OpenAlex one. Um, it will have kind of some information about the API, terms of use, sort of, so that you can quickly find um, information about the data and other documentation relevant. And then kind of go through some basic, setup. And then usually each tutorial will have two or three use cases. So in this case, the first use case is just running a simple query, and then it goes into um, retrieving publications from an institution. I think in this case we use University of Alabama as a use case, and then this is just collecting some more data, plotting publications. This is
Mhm.
number of UA publications per year that were collected from the API. So kind of a simple visualization, and then some other use cases. This is looking more at the open access tags that we were able to identify. So each of these, they're definitely not designed, if you don't know, if you're unfamiliar with programming, I think this can be a difficult place to start. And so what I think the cookbook is most useful for is for, researchers that are interested in learning about it so they can get, some interesting use case ideas for how they can interact with these resources. And then you could, of course, contact me or contact the libraries and we can sort of help you develop, a custom use case for your application. So if you're new, I think it's useful for getting ideas. And then if you're already experienced with programming, then I think it's a nice sort of quick way to see some different use cases and how to use, your particular programming language to interact with these APIs. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I know that I've clicked around in them and I know enough to be able to read a little bit of Python code, but I am not good at writing it. And I've sort of looked through some of these, and I think one of the things that occurs to me as I'm looking through it is that I never even realized that a person could do a thing like that. Like it hadn't been part of my sort of conceptual framework of thinking, like, what are the possibilities of when I gather information, like, what are the possibilities? And I think about this, and it's so different from the types of things that I've done in the past. And it's very exciting to me because I'm like, oh, I could get all of this at the same time, or I could define
yeah.
very, very accurately and only get things that fit within this very specific scope, which is difficult to do when you're doing a keyword search. And then I have definitely experienced the whole like trying to do like a content analysis of a journal for a period of years and like downloading every PDF of the journal, every article separately.
Right.
And it's
Yeah, and that's
like
and that's
I
kind
did
of an
that by
interesting
hand one time, and then when I saw your stuff, I was like, oh, I could do that all together.
Yeah, and it's a little complex with the full text stuff. Each publisher kind of has their own terms and stuff. And that's one of the things that we've tried to do with a cookbook is kind of promote sort of responsible use of these APIs. And I actually just noticed a typo on the OpenAlex one. I think this should say the OpenAlex API data is licensed under this. So we're constantly kind of improving and making sure that users know kind of what are the terms of the API, what you can and cannot do with them, what are the data license terms, and with full text APIs, for example, they'll have really kind of detailed policies around text and data mining and things like that. And so we're actually, I mentioned I noticed a typo here, but we're actually working right now on kind of a major update. So this was initial version was 2022. We've added some tutorials along the way. Now we're kind of going back to those APIs and making sure that we have kind of the relevant links,
Yeah.
reuse terms of the data of the API. Again, just to kind of promote kind of responsible use of these resources, because that's one of the things generally with literature and scholarly resources, they don't want you to access the resources or I'll say it like this. They have designated ways that they may or may not permit programmatic access, and we
Yeah.
want to promote, the appropriate ways to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, how would somebody find your API cookbook? Where does it like how would you navigate to it? Can you just Google it?
Yes, you should be able to Google UA Libraries Scholarly API Cookbook, or we also have it available on GitHub. If you, I should say, it is hosted on GitHub, and so if you search for UA Libraries Research Data Services, our cookbook is there. All the source code is available on GitHub, and then the rendered version, which is using Jupyter Book, is
Mhm.
available here, and that's what looks like more like the nice
Yeah. Okay.
HTML layout. And so, and we want people to reuse it. It's openly accessible, so it's for UA researchers, students, and others that find the information useful. And the idea with the cookbook, right, is that if you find um, here's Chronically America, if you find a piece of code that is useful and you can integrate it and adapt it into your research, that's sort of the idea with this resource.
So, how do you integrate this cookbook into the programming that you do with your research computing program that you have?
Yeah, so I think what in the past we've really focused on building up the tutorials, doing some general workshops and kind of consultations with helping researchers programmatically access information and compile information, but we haven't really focused yet on kind of applications downstream. All right, so you've got the data now, what do you want to do with it? We've done a little bit with some network analysis and things that have been collected from APIs, but now I think what we want to do moving forward with research computing is show, how do you collect the data, and then how do you do something interesting with that data, whether it's, some type of natural language processing or, machine learning around the data. And that's kind of what we're hoping to do over the next year or two, is kind of integrate this Scholarly API Cookbook data collection into more sort of data analysis and use cases. Yeah.
Yeah. So when your students are having their open coding assistance labs over at Rogers Library, do they usually pull this up when they're helping people? Is this a place that they point people to? Do they get code from it and walk people through it? Or what does that usually look like?
Yeah, so I think definitely if somebody is looking for, if researchers are interested in, programmatically accessing information, this is a great resource. But if they're interested in more kind of general coding, this might not be totally applicable because it's not really a beginner type resource.
Right.
Um, but I think it's also a good, maybe, I think at least it might be a good model for how you might be able to construct tutorials and share tutorials online. This Jupyter Book platform is really nice to be able to get a nice layout, and you could see it has very nice formatting and visuals and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your aspirations moving forward after you like what is your end goal for the API cookbook and what is your greater end goal with the research that you're doing specifically as far as like supporting digital scholarship goes? What kinds of ideas do you have next?
Yeah. So right now, as I think we touched on a little bit, we're going through kind of a major update. We noticed some typos and outdated links, so we're going to work on that, and we want to standardize the tutorials. So, these were written anywhere from, 2021 to 2025, and we've had a lot of different wonderful, talented student programmers working on them. And, everybody might have their own sort of style. And so what we're trying to do is make it consistent so that we have, consistent headers and sort of style. So that's kind of step one. We've also um, we had up until a few weeks ago, we had, so right now I think there's 34, 35 different scholarly API tutorials. And then with that, several of them had the same tutorial in different programming languages. So Python, R, Mathematica, MATLAB, Bash, and some even had C recipes. So we might have had for one tutorial, we had like 5 or 6 different um, tutorials for the same Scholarly API. We've we we've thought that was very nice and great, so people can see different programming languages, but we found that it's very difficult to maintain. And so what we did was we're archiving kind of everything except for we've decided to focus on Python and R.
Yeah.
So that will make it easier to maintain the cookbook. So we'll standardize it, we'll focus on Python and R. As far as like new, and by the way, we haven't like deleted the old tutorials. We just put them on a different GitHub repository as an archive. So if somebody's interested in, using MATLAB or so, they can go to that old archive. Um, as far as, new content, what we want to do is potentially look at maybe adding um, some large language model API type tutorials. I know that's of interest, so we'll look at that. I know there's some OpenAI APIs. There's GitHub Models APIs, which allows you to interact with those. So we might think about adding those as well as enhance some of the existing tutorials to show full text, um, full sort of natural language processing around scholarly full text is very
Yeah.
very popular, and so we want to maybe enhance some of our tutorials in that context to show how to parse XML data so that you can start to use it downstream. The other thing we're looking at is, let's see. Yeah, I think just integrating this into more, you asked about the end goal, I think, is really using this as the starting point for, interesting use cases downstream that we might be able to integrate into classes or other workshops, and that this would just be kind of a minor component to it. It'd be like, all right, let's collect the data with this method, but now let's focus our attention on, network analysis or natural language processing. So I think that's sort of the end goal. Um, And then I think other, minor enhancements, like I think we could think about it right now we manually test code and then we just put like a date on when it was last tested. So for example, on the Web of Science one, let's see, this is a pretty recent one. So recipe examples were tested on February 12th, 2025. And we're manually testing this, locally, and there might be some ways to think about how to automate some of the testing of the code. So that's something that we can think about enhancing for maintainability type of processes.
Yeah.
Now, what else can I think about? Let's see.
I think I'd be interested to hear you talk a little bit about like once you get this, can you show us an example of what the code or what the data looks like after you pull it using one
Yeah.
of these recipes?
Let's see. So data can be, it'll totally depend on the API, but here's an example from PubChem that I think might represent some different types of data. So in this case, there's a query for let's see, I haven't looked at this one in a little while, but it looks like we're pulling a compound, and so it actually returned a PNG. So you can get, image data back. And then
Mhm.
here's a good example where we're requesting certain identifiers about a compound, and this returned a little code or a little data snippet here in JSON format, which you can then see there's a entity, like there's like the entity value. So the CID is this value, the Inchi identifier is this value. And then you can easily, well, I shouldn't say easily, but you can parse out the individual information and format it however you want it from this. So in this case, we're just extracting a single entity here, Inchi, but you could, if you had a series of these, you could format them as a, CSV file or some other tabular file format for downstream processing. So usually it definitely depends on the individual API, but there'll be some type of returned format of data that, looks something like this, where there'll be a kind of a name value pair.
Okay. Yeah, I think that that's really cool because it could then go into so many different types of uh DH methodologies that we use.
Right.
Talked broadly about text analysis and like text mining, but there's so many different things to do with that, with sentiment analysis and topic modeling and network analysis. And so this actually would pull data that we could, that in a structured way that we could structure specifically for those activities and be able to visualize them without having to get really messy in a spreadsheet. Um,
Right. Yeah. And without having to sort of manually go to a website, download a file or, enter your search query, download a file, and then, manipulate that file in some other spreadsheet application. And maybe there's a the chance that you corrupt something, or there's sort of, it keeps the workflow by doing it kind of in a programming, uh, computational notebook. It keeps everything together in one space, so that's very transparent. You can see everything that you're doing. And yeah, if you corrupt something or mess something up in the notebook, it's very easy to see kind of the step and where you did that. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there's ways to prevent that in spreadsheets, but you just need to kind of have some notes and kind of keep a log on what you've done. And yeah.
Very cool. Um, like I've said, like I learn so much when I listen to you talk about these things. They're so outside of my own experience and my, research, I guess, muscle memory, but they represent such an exciting like potential for a lot of things that I want to do in the future. I know that. So, I really appreciate the time that you're taking to sort of talk to us. I know this is a non-traditional audience for you, but I keep on trying to pull you into my DH work. And I am getting the feeling that it's not unwilling, like that you're interested in some
Yeah.
of the things that I'm throwing at you. So I
Oh,
just
definitely. Yeah. And I think we've talked about like the natural language processing stuff. And
yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for this type of work, the Scala API Cookbook, and to pull data to then do some really interesting things with various classes.
Yeah. I'm curious if there is a sort of a parallel project that we could work on that has just like sample snippets of code for people to do some of these things with the stuff that they after they've pulled it. So you pull it with the stuff that you find in the API cookbook, and then like what are some of the coding methods that we can use to achieve some of these more like outcome-based goals. Um,
Yep.
I think that is a potential that I could see. I definitely see need for. I know that I am working on something that is partially inspired by this, and I'm calling it the DH Toolkit, and it's tutorials and use cases for different DH tools and methods. It doesn't look the same. It's not programming in this way, but it is sort of just the idea of putting a collection of things together for people to play with, um, and sort of sandbox tutorials. So you are partially responsible for inspiring that activity that I'm doing. Um,
Oh, well, thank you.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think just to kind of emphasize what you said, I think it's true. I think the next step will be yeah, using this as that first step to then do some interesting things that you can see from, start to finish. Okay, you've collected the data. Now let's do something with it. Yeah.
Have you done anything with this for Hathi Trust?
We not on the in the cookbook, but we have experimented with some, I think it's, what is it, the Hothy Analytics
Hmm.
platform. So yeah, we've done a little bit of experimentation with that, but um we mostly use the web-based platform for
Hmm.
it. But I think there are some ways that you can programmatically access the information, but we haven't fully explored those.
Yeah. I am interested in like I have it's been a couple of years since I've really poked at Hathi Trust, and
Yeah.
um I th I think that there's probably some new stuff that I could discover, and I think that there are some new things, new ways of looking at things. I think
Mhm.
um I just finished a huge project that was taking up so much of my brain space, and I am really, I think, excited about the possibility of having the time and the conceptual space, or like the cognitive space to sort of build my coding muscles a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah,
It,
we'll definitely, actually, the Hothy Trust is on my my to-do list to look at again, because I had
Yeah.
looked at that last summer. I spent a little bit of time looking at the analytics pieces that they have on the web, and so yeah, definitely something that we can take a closer look at.
Yeah. I would be interested in looking at that with you.
Yeah.
I think we're coming up on time, Vin. We've
All
talked
right.
so much. So thank you so much. This has been really great. I always enjoy hearing about what you're doing, and I want everybody to know about the API Cookbook because I think it's from a conceptual standpoint, I just think it's a fantastic tool and resource, and um, I think that a lot more people are going to be using coding. A lot more humanists are going to be learning coding. I know that um, there are a couple of Ph.D. programs in the humanities that are allowing their students to take Python as their foreign language, which
Oh,
is,
very cool.
yeah. So,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
and I'll put if I can put a little advertisement out there, if
yes,
anyone at the university happens to watch this and they're interested in trying some, scholarly API work or interested in programming, we do help researchers write the scripts. So if you see
yeah,
something, interesting, but you're like, it's not quite what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do this a little different. We can actually help you write those scripts and get you started. So that you can, see the script and you can run it yourself, collect the data, adapt it.
yeah,
And so we work with researchers with that.
yeah. I will make sure and put your information in our YouTube description so that people can get to, uh, all of the information
Perfect. Yeah,
about research
I
computing
think I sent you
programming.
the cookbook link, but we can add that
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Got the cookbook link, and then I'll find other places where I can link. And I know if people want classroom instruction with research computing, I have a place on the ADHC website that you and I are building out where people
Yes.
can request it through the ADHC website. And it doesn't go across my desk, it goes straight to you. But um,
Okay.
yeah, I
Very
don't have
good.
to mediate that situation.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see, start promoting that and seeing what kind of crossover we're able to achieve with that. Thank
Yeah.
you so much, Vin.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
This episode of ADHC Talks has been brought to you from the campus of the University of Alabama. This is Sara Whitver. Join us again next time to hear more about DH folks and their super cool projects. Goodbye.